Aloha everyone. If you saw part 2 of my budget dream camera build, you may recall that I mentioned struggling with composition using the 24mm Sony G prime lens. If you haven't seen that video yet, I'll post a link to it here. However, while reviewing the Tamron 28-75 f2.8 G2, I also had this to say about the 24mm focal length. So one of the questions was whether or not I would miss that extra 4mm of width. I do have to say that there were occasions this morning that I did hope for a little more width. In fact, I found myself trying to rotate the zoom ring just a little bit more out of habit, since I'm used to having 24mm on the wide angle. This is one of those shots where I wish I had a little more width. For this reason, and the fact that I want to take a small, wide-angle prime lens with me to Rome this summer, I decided to give the 24mm focal length another try. Lucky for me, the Tamron 24mm f2.8 III OSD M1 2 went on sale recently for $20 off retail, and I picked one up this past weekend. Alrighty, so why don't we go ahead and unbox the Tamron 24mm 2.8 III OSD M1 2. So as you can see, it just comes in this plain white box. Comes supplied with a lens hood, which I absolutely love. Thank you Viltrox and Tamron for doing that. It is a little shallow though, so I wonder how much light that's actually going to block. Okay. Okay, the usual instructions manual and warranty information. So now on to the lens itself. Insert here. Let me put this aside for a second. Like so. Okay, it comes wrapped in, it's not really bubble wrap, but some kind of protective pouch. Okay, and here it is. It does feel actually heavier than I thought it would. I know from other reviews it's mainly plastic, although I do believe it has, yeah, it has a very thin weather sealing ring here. The focus ring turns fairly smoothly with a good amount of heft. Compared to the 24mm G though, I mean obviously the build quality of the Sony lens is much better. This is also missing any kind of external controls other than the focus ring. So there's no focus hold button, there's no aperture ring either. And I'm noticing it's considerably larger than the Sony 24mm G. I don't know that it's heavier though, because I believe the other lens uses an all-metal construction and it also has those additional features. So I think one of the reasons why it's considerably larger is because, for better or worse, Tamron is committed to using 67mm filters. So if you can see, the front element actually is quite small. But in order to accommodate the 67mm filter, you can see that the lens barrel itself has a very wide diameter. And you can see here the recess between the lens barrel and the actual front element. But anyway, having said that, I got this, it was on sale for like $180, whereas I believe the Sony is still retailing for $550 or $600. Again, I'll put that information up on the video right now. You might be able to get that one a little bit cheaper used if there's an available copy. But let's go ahead and grab my A7C II and see what it looks like on the actual camera. Okay, here it is on the camera. And just for comparison, here's the Tamron 28-75 that I purchased earlier. Now, when I was putting this lens on the camera, it is an extremely tight fit, so I'm not sure if it's the copy I have or if that's something that's standard across the line, but just keep that in mind. Okay, let's move this off for a second. So that's what it looks like on the A7C II. Again, the barrel's like really fat here. I mean, it's very noticeable. I guess balance-wise, though, it's not that front heavy. But again, comparing it to the 24mm G lens that we had earlier, you can definitely tell that the balance is off. So much of it, I guess, is on this front part of the lens. So again, one of the reasons why I purchased this, or I guess the main reason why I purchased this, is because using the 28-75, I do miss having that 24mm, that little bit of extra width when I'm taking pictures of buildings and landscape. So I did want to try this again. I didn't want to commit to paying $550 or $600 for the Sony lens. And this one also has the added bonus that you can use it like a macro lens. So I'm really looking forward to using that. And let's try it with the lens hood on. Oh, that's nice. It clicks. Very positive engagement with the lens hood. It does add to the depth of the lens, though. So it's not quite the stealthy package that the A7C II is with the Sony 24mm. And this is looking down onto the lens. Again, this lens hood is very shallow. I'm not exactly sure how much straight light that will block, but I guess we'll find out. So anyway, I plan on taking this out today. I will take a few pictures and post some samples and let you know what I think about it. Since I intend to bring this lens with me to Europe this summer, if it works out, I wanted to test it out in a simulated walking tour, focusing mainly on taking pictures of buildings and monuments and other points of interest. So I decided to do a short photo walk of downtown Honolulu. Okay, a couple of caveats about the pictures on the photo tour. All the photos were shot in RAW and then processed in Luminar Neo. Post-processing consisted of applying the camera profile VV under the optics tab. Distortion, chromatic aberration, and defringe corrections were applied. They also have a process called noiseless RAW, and I used a low-level processing for that. For almost all these pictures, I needed to increase the shadows and then decrease the highlights. I imagine that was just because it was so bright outside. I also erased some distracting elements, and then other than that, I just cropped the photos. Since I was interested in the lens's macro capabilities, I did take a few macro pics. The same caveats apply to these pictures as they do to the previous set. With the exception of white balance, there was some mixed lighting in the restaurant, so I did have to correct the white balance a bit to remove some color cast. Okay, let's talk about the pros of the Tamron 24mm f2.8 Di3 OSD M1 2. First off, at $199.99 USD retail, this lens represents a tremendous value. Also, the simple design may be desirable for people who are used to controlling their aperture using their camera settings and don't require a special function button on their lens. The lens produces very sharp images, the color rendition is beautiful, and I really love the macro capability. Also, early in the video, I expressed some concern about how shallow the lens hood was, but as you can see in a lot of these pictures where I'm shooting directly into the sun, flare is very well controlled with that little lens hood. And I should mention that I do have a UV filter attached to the front of the lens, and even then there were no stray reflections between the UV filter and the front element. Finally, if you have other recent vintage Tamron lenses, that means you can swap the filters between all your different lenses since they all use the same 67mm filter size. Now let's talk about the cons. And speaking of filter size, that could actually be a con. As I showed earlier in the video during the unboxing, the lens barrel is much bigger than it needs to be. Also, for those looking for external controls, such as the aforementioned aperture ring or special function button, the simple design can be a negative. For instance, I like having that special function button. I use it sometimes to turn on and off facial recognition. Finally, the lens is a bit heavy for a 24mm prime lens, and although it didn't feel unbalanced for the short time that I was using it, I imagine after a full day's worth of shooting that you would begin to feel a little fatigue in your hands from the nose heavy balance, especially on a camera like the Sony A7C II that has a very small grip. Having said all that, however, I can tell you that I am very happy with this purchase. And getting it for $20 off of retail makes it a hard proposition to turn down. And having that macro capability, well, you feel like you've gotten two lenses for the price of one. So I guess this lens will be heading to Europe with me this summer and taking in the sights and sounds of Rome during a Jubilee year. Well, if you made it to the end of the video, mahalo, I appreciate it. Please let me know if you have any questions regarding the gear that we talked about in today's video, or any of the sites that we visited in downtown Honolulu. Please make sure to drop a like if you found any of this content informative or entertaining. Please make sure to comment, share, and subscribe for future content. By the way, if you're traveling like myself this summer, please make sure to check out my travel safety tips, and I'll post a link to that here.